Awesome. Let's get started. So this is a keynote panel. We're going to talk about industry involvement, and thank you so much for being here this morning. It's really nice to see that the industry leaders are here to talk about their thoughts. Allow me to introduce the panelists. So with AWS, we have Andy Warfield, who is a vice president and distinguished engineer at Amazon Web Services. He leads a global team of engineers for AWS's largest data services, such as Amazon S3. Welcome.
Thanks.
And for Cloudera, we have Venkat Ranjaji, who is a senior vice president of product management at Cloudera. He's responsible for the company's product strategy, vision, and experience. He has been extensively involved with driving Iceberg adoption and thought leadership within Cloudera, and is an advocate for open source community. Jason Reed is a director of product management at Databricks, and he is a co-founder of Tabular. He's currently working on enhancing data compatibility and interoperability between lakehouse formats. We have Tomer Sharan, who is the founder and chief product officer at Dremio. Under his leadership, Dremio has co-created transformative open source projects such as Apache Arrow, Apache Polaris, and has been a driving force in promoting Apache Iceberg adoption industry-wide. We have Raghu Ramakrishnan, who is the CTO for data and a technical fellow at Microsoft. He's driving Microsoft's adoption of Iceberg formats and interop across Delta and Iceberg and OneLake through Xtable within Microsoft Fabric. Christian Kleinerman serves as a Snowflake EVP of product and has been with the company since 2018. He oversees the company's global product strategy and vision. Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. I have a lot of questions, and some of these questions are, from the community. We, want to figure out things that people will want to know best from your organizations. So, Andy, this first one is for you. AWS has been investing heavily on open table formats, particularly with Apache Iceberg, with the launch of Amazon SageMaker. In your recent blog post, for AWS Pi Day, in S3, simplicity is table stakes. You mentioned that the launch of S3 tables is influenced by the customer's desires to have first-class table abstractions over Parquet objects on S3. So what has been AWS's approach in embedding Iceberg capabilities across its services, and how do you foresee AWS's investment in Iceberg for the future?
Oh, okay. This launch of S3 tables and the work with Parquet and Iceberg has been a pretty incredible adventure so far, and I think we're pretty early in it. One thing that I found, I've been working with S3 for 8 years now, and one thing that I found really surprising when I started was the degree to which Parquet workloads featured on it. At this point, it's an interesting statistic. We're doing about 15 million Parquet GET requests a second pretty much all the time. So there's just a ton of Parquet work on S3. I think when we started to see Iceberg, when we first talked to Ryan and Dan, and we started to see Iceberg uptake, Iceberg was added to Glue in 2021, we started to hear customers really pushing us to make that experience simpler. And so the work that led up to S3 tables was actually 2 years of conversations with our largest Iceberg customers, folks like Netflix and Pinterest, telling us that they didn't want to manage compaction on their own necessarily in the fullness of time, right? They wanted to have a managed abstraction that was really, really powerful. And so I think the place where we've been pushed with S3 tables, listening to customers, has really been, any engine on any data with the simplest possible experience of using it. The thing that I would call out that's been remarkable since launching tables, which was only at reInvent in December of last year, so it's really early, is first of all, the uptake has been incredible. And second, we've realized really quickly that there's this huge set of use cases that are non-traditional analytics use cases. It's a lot of the thing that Ryan was hinting at with small tables. We built this S3 metadata product that actually takes the inventory list of what's in your bucket and puts it into an Iceberg table. And we're using that as a first-class primitive for S3 customers to interact with what's in their bucket, not necessarily to run traditional analytics. And so I think the place where we're likely to be pushed is to turn this table abstraction into a first-class thing that's as important, possibly even more important than an object in S3. And so that's really where we're seeing things going.
Thank you. The next one is for Cloudera. So Cloudera's business is built on a hybrid on-prem and cloud model. Do you feel that the growth of Iceberg is supporting or working against this model? And where do you see Iceberg fitting into your business in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's actually really supporting our model. What I really love about this panel is the reality is, while we may all independently say we're the only platform for whatever the case may be, the reality is within our customer environments, we have to work together, all of us, every single one of us as vendors within our customer environments always are working together in a pretty broad and heterogeneous ecosystem. And so everybody does something particularly well, I would say. Every single one of us does something particularly well. And what we do particularly well, and where we kind of always grew up from the big data distributed systems model, is we do data processing at scale, massive scale, on petabytes of data on a nightly basis, right? That's really hard work to actually get done. But then there are other things that other people use, and so everybody does something differently with different engines for different purposes, whether that's for analytics, whether that's AI, whatever the case may be. And I think the reality is what Iceberg has enabled, and specifically the REST catalog in particular, I think has been a bit of a game changer in particular, is it allows all of us to, it levels the playing field and allows all of us to more effectively work together, and it ultimately benefits the customer, right? The customers can use the best engine for the particular type of workload that they need at that particular time, but use it against that shared data set in a fairly easy way, in a standardized, centralized, normalized way. And so what we're seeing is, yes, we've been hybrid. We both support public cloud. We also have always been deployed in the data center on premise as well. But what we're seeing is a lot of hybrid use cases where they may want to spin up analytics compute or maybe even AI compute, running it against data that might be sitting on-prem, but being able to query that across an Iceberg object for whatever the case may be in a hybrid fashion from compute somewhere else against data on-prem. That's something that we're starting to see. We're actually getting quite a bit of demand for actually in the marketplace from many of our customers as well. So I think at the end of the day, this is not actually hindering us. This is actually helping us. And I would even say, I think, as Ryan mentioned, kind of, where Cloudera came from, Hive table and things like that, we're also starting to see that modernization as well from Hive table to Iceberg as a big opportunity for us, and modernizing our customers and really kind of enabling that interoperability across the entire data and analytics ecosystem. So I actually see it as a growth vector for Cloudera, not something that actually hinders us.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. There are a lot of Hive tables out there.
Yeah, there are.
Okay, Jason, this one's for you. The acquisition of Tabular by Databricks has made waves both in the Iceberg community and the broader tech community. Why was Iceberg a worthwhile investment for Databricks? And more importantly, where do you see this benefiting the open source Iceberg community?
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of different ways you could potentially think of. In my opinion, I think one of the biggest ones is, Ryan used to always say, he said this going back to the early days of Netflix, is like, you shouldn't have to think about Iceberg. And that was like, you shouldn't have to think about table formats, these low-level storage primitives. Like, you're there to get your data processing done, to get your analytics, to get your answers, whatever you're trying to do to drive the business forward. And unfortunately, we ended up in a world where people were thinking a lot about storage formats. We talked to all the customers we talked to at Tabular, and the customers I talk to now at Databricks. Again, like you're mentioning, the ecosystem of lots of different tools. And one of the fundamental questions that people are trying to answer is oh, well, do I store my data in Iceberg or in Delta or whatever format it might be? And that's really not the question they should be asking. And it was driving their larger architectural decisions just based on this storage metadata. That's not helpful or healthy for, I think, anybody on this stage, and certainly not for the customer base. And so I think the biggest thing is what Ryan has mentioned is the opportunity to collaborate, the opportunity to push this whole open storage format forward in a way that covers more use cases. We're not just dealing with, hey, big, object in S3 and distributed, Java engines. We've got other languages. We've got single process engines. All this stuff wants to work against these table primitives. And now we can do that, and hopefully we can do it in a way that's like agnostic in terms of which our metadata structure happens to be, and then push the whole thing forward. So I think that's a big one for Databricks, and I think why the combination of like bringing Tabular, Ryan and Dan and the team over to Databricks, and like the collaboration that he's talking about has been super healthy. It's been fun to watch. And I think the community at large, both vendor ecosystem and certainly the customers who are just trying to get work done on their data, is going to benefit.
Yeah, I think there's already a lot of collaboration happening organically within the community. Deletion vector was originally in Delta that we took over in Iceberg to solve a specific problem. In other projects as well, we've learned from Delta RS, for example, to see all of the implementations and maybe the pitfalls that they ran in, and like take that learning into the Iceberg project as well. Okay, so the next one is for Tomer from Dremio. Dremio has invested significantly in Iceberg for their own product and business. What made you confident that you can make this bet, and why Iceberg over any other table formats?
Yeah, I think, look, from the very early days at Dremio, we have always believed in this idea of kind of an open data architecture and open data. Even in the very early years, we created a project called Apache Arrow, which probably everybody here now has used. I think it's downloaded like 100 million times a month, or maybe more. And the idea there was, let's create a common kind of in-memory format, right? And way for systems to exchange data really quickly, right? And that's been very successful. And at the time, there just wasn't anything like it, right? Various databases had their own internal columnar formats and things like that were proprietary. When it came to the table format, we looked at the options and basically saw a project that Netflix was working on that seemed like this could address the needs that we had from a customer standpoint in terms of the use cases, but had the potential also to be something that's open, right? That could be used by many different platforms and engines and tools and so forth. And so we decided not to create our own, but to actually go and invest in it. And so hired a number of evangelists, put a ton of effort into evangelizing it. I think for a number of years, kind of our own community conference was the de facto Iceberg conference, right? We had Ryan come in every year and present at that conference, and it's great that now we actually finally have our own event for the project. And so that's always been our kind of philosophy around kind of an open data architecture. And going forward, we see the same opportunity with the catalog, right? So super excited about all the investment right now that we're doing alongside Christian here with Snowflake and hopefully many others here around Apache Polaris. We see a huge need to have an open source and community-driven catalog as well, because that is going to be the next form of lock-in when it comes to your data estate.
That's clear. Yeah, you invest in the community, and the community also helps out. So it's really nice, and I really appreciate the pre-Iceberg conferences that you guys put through. Very, very good content always. Okay, so this one's for Raghu. So in line with the growing trend of openness and open data, we're seeing the rise of unified data analytics platforms. Microsoft launched Fabric and OneLake in May 2023 to provide, quote, unified compute infrastructure and unified data lake. You also wrote a blog last April titled Microsoft's Vision for Open Data Lakehouse Ecosystem, Open Lakes, Not Walled Gardens, advocating for unified analytics and open data formats. How does Apache Iceberg contribute to this vision?
Thanks, Kevin. Basically, we want to meet customers where they are. We think we have some fabulous tools, but then there are customers who inexplicably want to use Snowflake or Databricks or what have you.
What?
Right? So our take is they shouldn't have to schlep their data across silos. So from the very inception of OneLake, OneLake is a thin SaaS veneer over ADLS. ADLS is basically HDFS as a cloud PaaS service. One of the distinctive features of OneLake from day one has been support for first-class tables. And I can tell you this didn't happen without a lot of discussion, as you can imagine. Every engine in Fabric standardized upon open formats. We support Delta, we support Iceberg, we support interop through Xtable. And for example, if you take the version of SQL that runs in Fabric, beneath the parser, beneath the T-SQL head, pretty much everything, storage is in these standard columnar formats. Concurrency control, recovery, everything, it's a fork. And you can imagine the level of investment that involved. That's kind of the depth of the commitment we have to being truly open. And if you look at the numbers, in the brief time since Fabric went GA, we have over, 21,000 customers is what I heard. We just had FabCon devoted only to Fabric in Las Vegas. We had over 6,000 customers and 6,000 attendees. So, and here's another interesting stat. Over 85% of users use at least 3 distinct engines, just Fabric engines, not counting people who access the data through other engines like Databricks or Snowflake, right? So that's really the vision, that you're sharing your data across many engines. And earlier this morning, Jason said to me that for the first time, we as a community are developing the storage layer of a modern warehouse, lakehouse, call it what you will,
Right.
together, right? And I think it's an incredibly important effort, and that's what Iceberg represents for us,
Yeah.
right? And so Iceberg, Polaris, the point you made about governance, for enterprises, data that's not governed is not useful. So the openness has to embrace the full stack.
Right, right. And it's a lot easier to build on top of that when you have a open shared data layer in the table abstraction. So Snowflake hasn't always been known for embracing openness, whether in open data, open source, open formats. However, in the past year, Snowflake has launched support for Iceberg tables and played a key role in kickstarting Apache Polaris. So what drove this shift? And how do you see Snowflake's role in open data ecosystem evolving?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I think that the change was mainly driven by what was possible or what is possible at any given point in time. Rewind, Snowflake started 13 years ago. And the reality of organizations, many of you in the room, was I have my data heavily siloed in lots of database systems, each one with proprietary formats. Some amount of data is in Hadoop, which has great scalability characteristics, but did not have a lot of the benefits of traditional database technology. And the insight the Snowflake founders had was, how do we bring those two worlds together? It's not that Ryan and Iceberg were ready that day and say, hey, we chose to ignore it. No, it was simply not a reality. If anything, one of the great innovations that Snowflake brought to the market was the separation of storage and compute, which helped a lot of what we are all experiencing today, which is, hey, how about we all have a common data plane, and then you can mix and match engines. Mm-hmm. As the ability to have a standard open storage representation, which is what we are all seeing, and with Parquet as a file format, Iceberg as a table format. Now, of course, we said we want to be part of this architecture. We want the level playing field. Mm-hmm. We do want all of you to be able to mix and match engines, like as Raghu or even Databricks or AWS. All of us here compete to a degree, but most important, you have us all sitting here because we all also partner on giving you interoperability of data. Mm. I'm 1,000,000% aligned with Raghu. It's not just I can read the data, but I can read and govern the data. It goes all the way to the catalog, and you've seen us innovate and contribute to the community on how do we enable this interoperability, and at the end of the day, give choice to all of you. So I would say it's not that we had a plan and the plan didn't work and we're changing it. No, like it's go look at the reality, and I think all of us here are innovating towards more data capability for all of your organizations.
Yeah, yeah. And at the end, the customer wins because the ecosystem is great, the community is great.
100%. What's happening in the industry is amazing for every customer, every organization out there wanting to get out of data, more value out of data. And if anyone is not trying to get more value out of data, I'm not sure what you're optimizing for.
Thank you for that. So those were all kind of very specific questions for leaders of your companies, and just to get some of your insights and how you're thinking about Iceberg, the community. I do have a few open questions, and feel free to speak as you wish. So the first one is, what Apache Iceberg features are you most looking forward to in the coming months and years? You just heard a few from Ryan. Maybe you have some favorites of your own. Anyone have favorites?
Yeah, like for me, the variant type is really interesting. For those that remember back in the day, the early days of Hadoop, right? The open file format was CSV, I think, or something like that, right? And then we all created Parquet, and there became a more efficient way to store columns, right? And tables, really, in those early days. And I think we still to this day haven't really provided a really fast format for semi-structured data, like for JSON. And I think with the variant type in Iceberg, we'll finally have that ability to store semi-structured data in an open format, and to do that really, really fast, right? Where you can still process the data fast, get columnar performance on semi-structured data.
Yeah, and semi-structured is becoming more and more important. You can't just fit everything into a tabular format. Anyway.
I think maybe two things really quickly. One is the maturing of the IRC is actually really, really interesting to watch. I think it was a controversial decision when it first showed up in the community, but I think it's proving itself quickly as a way of insulating against some of the fast changes that Iceberg wants to make under the covers. And across all of the teams that I talk to, S3 customers are excited about the flexibility to bring engines. All of the analytics teams and the SageMaker Studio folks are excited about integrating against any data on it.
Right.
I think maybe just to throw in a second one really quickly, a subtle and really meaningful thing over the last year has been the amount of work and motion on client libraries. It's a easy to ignore thing, but I think it's actually really, really meaningful. So all of the Iceberg native libraries, like PyIceberg in particular in Rust, but also all the third-party libraries like DuckDB, the Daft stuff that's happening. I think that the more that these things mature, the more that application data moves in, and it lights up a lot more analytics opportunity. Right. And so this is a bit that I think over the next year is so exciting to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I think of it as a community and a connectors, right? You're connected to more and more components, whether it's DuckDB, whether all the other clients. For IRC, Iceberg REST catalog, that's the way to interoperate with the Iceberg table, right?
Changes the way we use it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that's really great to hear. I have a second question is, how do you guys see your company being a good steward of and supporting the Iceberg community moving forward? I know there's, all the vendors are up here, there's a lot of money involved, but what do you guys think of supporting the community, supporting the open source project, especially for Apache Iceberg?
I mean, I can say the biggest thing that I think is helpful for the Iceberg community is that Ryan doesn't have to be a CEO anymore, and he's back to being an Iceberg, primary engineer. So I think the community heavily benefits from having more of his mind share on these problems, like solving metadata problems, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But I also think, in addition to that, pushing into new use cases. We talked a little bit about this, but I'm excited about solving additional challenges we haven't really been able to tackle with Iceberg yet. These are things like doing proper transactions across multiple tables. We've had these patterns going way back, even pre-Iceberg at Netflix, sort of the ability to write data, be able to audit it, make sure it's consistent, but not across a single table, but across multiple tables, right? And then have all of the data show up at once for downstream consumers in a way that everybody can trust. And so I think the project's going to continue. We're going to push these things forward because our customers are pushing us for these capabilities, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now that you have a shared storage layer, you need to move up the stack and best practices, data engineering problems, right? So it's great to hear that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think the commitment to an open format is key, right? There's so many other places where companies like ourselves, building an engine, right, building a lakehouse platform can differentiate, right? It doesn't have to be in how the data is stored, and I also think it shouldn't be in how the metadata is stored, right? The catalog aspect, I think that needs to be standardized as well, right? Because that otherwise then becomes another form of lock-in. But there's so many things that you can do to innovate, right? Iceberg is a format, right? It's not a processing engine, right? Like today we released clustering for Iceberg, which eliminates the need for partitioning, but that's all behind the scenes in how the files are organized, how they're sorted, and so forth. And that's the kind of thing that you can do kind of behind the scenes without impacting any user in terms of like having a standard format that they can read and write from with any engine. And I think that's key.
Yeah. And you see a number of projects coming around the ecosystem as well, right?
Yeah.
Polaris, for example.
ETL tools. I mean, there's a lot of the ETL tools have now adopted Iceberg, and it's become really, really easy just to get data into Iceberg directly, and that's awesome.
Yeah. So.
Can I call out one more thing before you flip?
Sure, yeah.
Like talking quickly with the panel before the day, I think we'd all love to see the 250 committers turn into 500 or 1,000 committers. And we're all actually eager to hire Iceberg developers.
Right.
And so like, that's a thing that I think any of us would be happy to hear from folks on.
Right. It's good to hear the investment. This one's my favorite question to ask. So how do you see Iceberg evolving in the next few years? You already got a preview from Ryan from the keynote, but especially in enterprise adoption. And what are the plans that you have to involve with the evolution of Iceberg with respect to enterprise adoption?
I'll give a controversial take, perhaps. So I think with the centralization, standardization at the format layer, right, it becomes less about the data that's getting stored and where it's getting stored in terms of the object store that it's running on. So Iceberg really kind of becomes that middle layer that's really the unifying layer across all the data in the estate. And then you can kind of bring your own engine. I think as we perhaps we'll start to see more performance-based improvements and tuning and optimization built into the Iceberg layer, right? You start to see that Iceberg looks and feels a little bit more like one of those traditional database file systems, right? And so then the engines and the computing process itself could be interesting. Like, what's the level of differentiation? It'll actually force even more focus on differentiation layer at the processing at the engine level, actually, as more performance gains you start to see coming out of the Iceberg layer. I think it'll be really, really fascinating to see the evolution of engine performance, engine differentiation based on more performance that we were probably going to see at the Iceberg layer moving forward. So I think that will be the fascinating evolution moving forward.
Right.
Pretty controversial take, I'm sure, but very interesting.
I'll add color. Like I do increasingly see Iceberg as the format of choice, and I like very much the way it has been architected, decoupled from any one engine. And probably the most important thing is, and you saw it in Ryan's presentation, it is truly being driven by a community. Many of you in the room, it is truly being driven by a collection of us in the industry. And that is what gives us like the leg up on the alternatives. So I do think that it converges towards, it is Iceberg, the answer. I also agree with ideally customers don't have to be making format choices. That's a little bit crazy that conversation happens in this day and age, but I think it goes in that direction. And you saw it in some of the proposals, but at least at Snowflake perspective, we're committed to partnering with the companies you see here. We're committed to partnering with the community at large. We're committed to interoperability, and we love what we're seeing. We love where things are headed.
So, plus one to pretty much everything that's been said. I will stress that Iceberg, if you look at its maturity, it's not a toddler, it's not quite an adult. Ryan touched on many of the things like alternative sort orders, what next, indexes. You heard about multi-table transactions. Well, multi-table, multi-statement transactions, right? These are table stakes in tier 1 workloads. And as we get there, it's important that we get there together in the same shared open standard mode, right? And don't forget things like access control, RLS, CLS, ABAC. these are things enterprise customers in particular require. And across the stack, as we evolve Iceberg, Polaris, the whole ecosystem, the key is going to be not to fragment the standardization. And how do we get there? Speaking for Microsoft, what I would like to see is actually taking internal dependencies on this whole stack.
Yeah.
For example, for the old timers in ex-Microsofties out there, if you know Cosmos and Scope, we are migrating all of that into Fabric and OneLake, right? So that's sort of the torture test of torture tests for any infra stack. The scale there is monstrous. But those kinds of things, you put your skin in the game. You put your money where your mouth is.
Right.
And the resulting things you need to do to address gaps, I'd like to see us actively contribute back, right? Not just take from the community, contribute back. We've been kind of slow out of the gates in terms of getting engaged in the Iceberg community, but I think we're there, we're committed, we hope to engage.
Yeah. I like the analogy of being a toddler. I think the project, as much as we've been done as part of the project, as part of the ecosystem, there's still so much more to do. You can pick up any database book or any database implementation. You see all of the features that are in there. We do have a shared storage now, but now you have to build on top of all of that and build and continue the innovation going forward. With that, this is the end of the panel. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time. It's really great to hear about your insights. I look forward to seeing your contribution to the community going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.